The needle was wrong. That was the first thing fleet analyst Verath noticed when she pulled the archive scan of Earth's northern magnetic pole. Not the planet itself, not its inhabitants, not the single fragile orbital station humans called their space program. Just the needle. A compass, recovered from a human vessel intercepted 3 cycles prior, spinning in its glass housing with no apparent destination. Not broken. Spinning deliberately asterisk, as though it had somewhere to be and hadn't decided yet. She set it on her console and watched it rotate. Behind her, the war room hummed with the quiet confidence of a civilization that had never lost a planetary acquisition. The Verk Dominion had absorbed 41 worlds, 41 species. Some had fought. Some had negotiated. Some had simply looked up at the sky and understood that the math didn't work in their favor. Earth's math was worse than most. The initial survey report had been almost embarrassing in its simplicity. 1 moon, 1 sun, no defensive grid, no orbital weapons platforms, a single space station staffed by 6 people at any given time, 6, a number so small it appeared in the report twice, as though the analysts suspected a clerical error. The planet's most advanced propulsion technology moved at a fraction of a percent of light speed. Their communications were still partially electromagnetic. They had not yet discovered faster-than-light travel, had no meaningful presence beyond their own atmosphere, and their military forces, while numerous, were confined entirely to the surface of one world, with a circumference smaller than some Verk cargo vessels. By every metric the Dominion used to assess resistance potential, Earth registered as a Category 2 acquisition. Minimal delay, minimal cost. Verath had been assigned to observe and confirm. A formality, technically, career filler between real assignments. She set the spinning compass in the corner of her field and went back to her data. 3 things bothered her before she'd finished the first briefing packet. The first, humans had been aware of the Dominion's survey drones for 11 months. The drones were designed to be invisible to pre-FTL civilizations. They had never been detected before, not once in 41 acquisitions. Earth had detected them in 19 days and said nothing publicly about it. The second, the single orbital station, the one with 6 crew members, had been quietly decommissioned 4 months ago. Officially, Earth's space agency cited budgetary restructuring. But when Verath ran the thermal imaging archive, the station's power consumption had actually increased after the public announcement of its closure. The third thing was harder to articulate. It wasn't a data point. It was an absence. In every previous acquisition, once survey drones were detected or even suspected, the target civilization's communication networks exploded with panic. Religious upheaval, political crisis, economic destabilization. The social fabric of a species discovering it was not alone in the universe, that something was watching it, always tore in predictable ways. Earth's networks were quiet. Not the quiet of ignorance, the quiet of a decision. Verath picked up the compass again. It had stopped spinning. The needle pointed, unwavering, at something she couldn't see. "Sub-Commander," she said without looking up, "when does the acquisition fleet arrive?" 42 days, said Sub-Commander Drath from across the room. He didn't look up from his own console. He never looked up. He was the kind of officer who had stopped being curious about new things decades ago. Why? Is there a problem? Probably not, Verath said. She almost believed it. 29 days before the fleet's arrival, humanity made its first visible move, and the Dominion's entire observation team agreed it was catastrophically stupid. The humans launched ships, 7 of them, small by any interstellar standard, each vessel roughly the size of a Verk personnel transport, armed with what the weapons analysts initially identified as solid projectile launchers and low-yield explosive payloads. The kind of armament that might, in ideal conditions, damage the hull of a scout craft. Against a Dominion acquisition fleet of 43 warships, they were not weapons. They were gestures. Drath watched the launch feeds with visible amusement. 7, he said. They sent 7 ships. 8, Verath corrected, not looking up. There's a thermal signature trailing the formation. Smaller, no visible propulsion. Drath squinted at the display. Malfunction. Possibly, she flagged it in the system, or not. The 7 visible ships assumed a defensive formation between Earth and the projected approach vector of the Dominion fleet. It was a tactically sound formation. She noted, not brilliant, but not naive either. They'd done the geometry correctly. They understood where the fleet would come from, which meant they'd correctly extrapolated the Dominion's FTL approach pattern from the survey drone flight data. From 19 days of observation, they had reverse-engineered FTL navigation geometry. Verath wrote that in her report, and then stared at it for a long time. They know they can't win, Drath said, leaning back in his chair with the comfortable certainty of a man who had done this 41 times. It's a show of force, dignity in defeat. Several species do it. The Morath sent 17 ships against our first wave, very moving, didn't change anything. The Morath didn't detect our drones, Verath said. Drath shrugged. What's your point? She didn't have one yet. That was the problem. 22 days before fleet arrival, the 8th ship revealed itself. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a relay, an unmanned communications platform broadcasting on a tight beam frequency directly toward the Dominion fleet's projected position. When the linguistics team decoded the transmission, they found not a declaration of war, not a plea for mercy, but something that sat in the gap between the two in a way that made the entire observation team uncomfortable. It was a question. We know you're coming. We know what you've done to 41 other worlds. We have one question before you arrive. Did any of them make you hesitate? The room went quiet. Posturing, Drath said, but his voice had lost a fraction of its certainty. It's not a threat, said Linguistics Officer Pren slowly. It's not a negotiation opener either. She paused. It's a diagnostic question. They want to know if we're capable of hesitation. Why would they want to know that? Drath asked. Nobody answered him. Verath sent a response through the fleet's communication array. She wasn't authorized to do it. She did it anyway, using her analyst credentials to route it through the survey drone network so it would reach the human relay within hours. She kept it short. No, none of them made us hesitate. The human response came back in 47 minutes, faster than the light speed delay should have allowed, which meant they'd anticipated her answer before she sent it, prepositioned a response, and broadcast it the moment their array detected any transmission on the relevant frequency. The response was 2 words. Good, continue. Drath read it 3 times. What does that mean? I think, Verath said carefully, it means they wanted to know if we were the kind of civilization that could be warned off, and now they know we aren't. She paused. I think we just gave them the last piece of information they needed. Information for what? She picked up the compass from the corner of her console, still pointing at something she couldn't see. I don't know yet, she said. That's what worries me. The fleet arrived on schedule, emerging from FTL transit in a formation so practiced it had become ceremonial. 43 warships arranged in a crescent that could sweep a planetary defense grid in under 4 hours. Fleet Commander Asek had done this 37 times personally. He was not a man who felt suspense. The 7 human ships were waiting exactly where they'd been for the past 19 days, holding their formation with the stubborn geometry of people who had calculated their position very carefully and intended to stay there. Asek looked at them for exactly 3 seconds. Open a channel, he said, standard acquisition terms. He had given this speech 37 times. It was designed to be overwhelming, a litany of the Dominion's military capability, the terms of surrender, the comparative casualty projections, the administrative framework that would govern the occupied territory. It was calibrated through decades of psychological research to trigger a very specific neurological response in the receiving species. The recognition that resistance was not merely futile but irrational. That the arithmetic of survival demanded compliance. The channel opened. Osek delivered the speech with the measured authority of a man reciting mathematics. When he finished, there was a 7-second pause. Then a human voice, calm and almost conversational, said, "Thank you for the thorough briefing. We have one request before we discuss terms." Osek raised a hand, and his communications officer kept the channel open. "Speak. We'd like you to look at your fleet's rear approach vector, specifically at the region of space, approximately 8,000 kilometers behind your formation's trailing edge." Osek frowned. He looked at his tactical officer, who was already running the scan. The scan came back clean, empty space, background radiation, nothing. "There is nothing there," Osek said. "Yes," the human voice said pleasantly. "That's what we wanted to confirm. Thank you. We're ready to discuss your surrender terms now." "Your surrender terms." The channel closed. The room was very quiet. "It's psychological theater," Osek said. "They're trying to make us paranoid about a non-threat, classic asymmetric misdirection." He straightened his uniform. "Continue the approach." He was right, of course. There was nothing behind them. Every scan confirmed it. What nobody on the bridge thought to do was run the scan again 30 seconds later. The mines were the first catastrophic misinterpretation. They weren't traditional mines, not the kind the Dominion's threat assessment algorithms had been trained to recognize. They had no propulsion, no targeting system, no explosive payload in any conventional sense. What they had were electromagnetic pulse generators the size of a human fist, dispersed across 8,000 kilometers of space in a pattern so sparse that even active scanning registered them as background debris. Each one was keyed to activate not when a ship came close, but when a ship moved away from them, specifically when a large mass accelerated beyond a certain threshold. When the fleet began its final approach burn, 47 of them activated simultaneously. The EMP cascade didn't destroy ships, it interrupted them. FTL drives went offline in a cascade that took 11 minutes to propagate through the formation. Weapons targeting systems rebooted. Navigation locked up. For approximately 6 minutes, 43 Dominion warships were effectively blind. 6 minutes. Osek stood on his bridge and watched his screens go dark and felt, for the first time in 37 planetary acquisitions, the particular cold that lives in the space between calculation and consequence. "How long to restore navigation?" he asked. 7 minutes, his systems officer said. Then, "Wait 4 minutes. The redundant systems are compensating." A pause. "Sir, the 7 human vessels are not advancing." "What are they doing?" "Holding position. They haven't moved." Osek thought about that. His systems were coming back online. The threat had been a nuisance, significant, startling, but ultimately a nuisance. The human ships still had no meaningful weapons capability. The acquisition timeline would be delayed by perhaps a day. "They wanted us blind for 6 minutes, he said. "Why? What can you do in 6 minutes against a fleet this size?" No one answered because the answer appeared to be nothing. "Posturing," Osek said. "Steadier now, back on familiar ground. Proceed." He had misunderstood the mines entirely. The mines weren't designed to stop the fleet. They were designed to measure it, specifically to measure how quickly the fleet's redundant systems compensated for an EMP cascade. In those 6 blind minutes, sensors the humans had seeded across the approach vector in the preceding 4 weeks had captured every detail of the Dominion fleet's recovery protocol. Which systems came back first? In what order? On what frequency? With what handshake signatures? The relay ship had been transmitting that data to Earth in real time. By the time Osek's navigation restored, Earth's signal intelligence teams had a complete technical fingerprint of every ship in the fleet. Not a guess, not an estimate, a fingerprint. Verath figured this out approximately 4 hours later, when she went back through the mine dispersal pattern and realized it wasn't random. It was a sensor array laid out in a precise geometric grid, each unit positioned to observe a specific section of the fleet from a different angle. She sat with that knowledge for a long time before she sent the report upward. Then she added a line she had never written in any previous analysis report. I recommend we reconsider the Category 2 classification. She got a response from Fleet Commander Osek's adjutant within the hour. It was polite, brief, and explained with bureaucratic patience that 42 worlds had been acquired using the same methodology, that the Category 2 classification was based on objective capability metrics rather than behavioral observation, and that Fleet Analyst Verath's concerns, while noted, did not constitute actionable intelligence. She read it twice. Then she pulled the personnel files for every human who had ever been intercepted, interviewed, or observed at close range by Dominion forces. There were 14 of them, encountered over 6 decades of covert Earth observation, mostly during accidental contact events near the solar system's outer boundary. She was looking for a pattern she couldn't name yet. She found it in the interview transcripts. In every single encounter, Dominion observers had asked the humans some variation of the same question: "Are you afraid?" And in every single encounter, the humans had given the same answer. Not verbally, the verbal answers varied, but physiologically, heart rate elevated, skin conductance increased, pupil dilation. The biological indicators of fear were present in every recorded interview without exception. Every human they had ever encountered up close had been afraid. And every human had continued anyway. Verath leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of the observation deck for a long time. In the Dominion's psychological research on resistance behavior, fear was classified as an asterisk deterrent, a mechanism that prevented irrational action, that forced organisms toward self-preservation calculations, that made surrender the logical outcome when the arithmetic was sufficiently overwhelming. Fear was the instrument through which the acquisition speech worked. Fear was why 42 worlds had complied. But if fear didn't stop them, if they were afraid, and it simply didn't asterisk matter, then the entire psychological model was wrong. Not for Earth, for everything. "Drath," she said. He didn't look up. "What? Have you ever seen a species that was visibly, measurably afraid and kept fighting anyway?" A long pause, he looked up. "No. Neither has anyone else in the Dominion," she said. "Our entire psychological acquisition model is built on the assumption that a sufficiently afraid species will seek self-preservation through compliance. We've never had to test what happens when fear and compliance separate." Drath stared at her. "You're saying?" "I'm saying we have no idea what we're walking into," she said. "And I'm saying they know we don't know." The compass sat in the corner of her display, still pointing at something she couldn't name. The first ground engagement began 3 days after the fleet established orbital position, and it lasted considerably longer than the Dominion's combat projections had suggested. Not because the humans had better weapons. They didn't. Not because they had better tactics in any technical sense. The Dominion's ground forces were better equipped, better coordinated, operating from superior intelligence and with orbital fire support that could reduce any fixed defensive position to glass within minutes. The problem was that the humans didn't use fixed defensive positions. They used asterisk everything else. The first assault team landed in what tactical scans had designated a low-population coastal city, selected specifically because its isolation would allow the Dominion to establish a foothold before moving inland. The scans had shown minimal military presence. They were accurate. There were fewer than 300 human military personnel in the city when the assault teams landed. There were, however, approximately 40,000 civilians. None of them evacuated. The assault team commander, a veteran of 11 planetary acquisitions named Gret, spent 45 minutes waiting for the evacuation that his training and every previous acquisition experience told him was coming. Civilians always evacuated when military forces arrived. It was biological. It was logical. Self-preservation. He sent a report back to Fleet. Civilian population is not clearing the engagement zone. Awaiting guidance. The response came back. Continue as planned. Civilians will disperse when engagement begins. They didn't. This isn't right, said Gret's second-in-command, a young officer on her first acquisition. Her name was Seal, and she was standing at the edge of a street watching a human woman hang laundry on a line between two buildings approximately 200 meters from the landing zone. The woman was working steadily, methodically, not looking at the Verk soldiers at all. Why is she doing that? Psychological denial, Gret said. It's a coping mechanism. She's unable to process the threat as real. She's looking at us, Seal said. She knows we're here. She's choosing not to. She stopped. Commander, she's not in denial. She's telling us something. What? That we're not worth stopping for. Gret ordered the advance. His teams moved through the city and encountered resistance at approximately every third intersection. Not from soldiers, but from civilians who had barricaded streets with whatever was available, who fled when pressed and reappeared behind the advance line to cut supply chains, who jammed Dominion communication frequencies with such a dense wall of electromagnetic noise that squad-level coordination became nearly impossible. Frequency jamming required equipment, military-grade equipment. These were civilians. It took Gret 4 hours to realize that the civilians and the military were not, functionally, separate categories. The humans had distributed their military knowledge and equipment through the civilian population so thoroughly that the distinction the Dominion's entire ground war doctrine was built on, combatant versus non-combatant, did not exist on Earth in the way it had on 42 previous worlds. He sent the report upward. ASEC received it with visible displeasure and ordered adjusted protocols. The adjusted protocols made things worse. Verath received Gret's field reports simultaneously with a flagged intelligence intercept that changed everything she thought she understood about the preceding 3 weeks. The intercept was a human internal communication, encrypted in a protocol their linguistics team had only partially cracked. The relevant portion, once decoded, read: Phase 1 complete, fingerprint acquired. Phase 2 initiation confirmed, timeline holding. They still think the 7 ships are the response. She read it 4 times. They still think the 7 ships are the response. The 7 ships were not the response. The 7 ships had never been the response. They were Phase 1. They were data collection bait positioned to draw the fleet into the minefield sensor grid, while simultaneously confirming the Dominion's approach vector, fleet composition, communication protocols, and tactical response patterns. The mines were not weapons, they were instruments. The relay ship's question, did any of them make you hesitate, was not psychological theater. It was a classification probe. They needed to know if the Dominion was the type of civilization that could be deterred, because if it was, the rest of the plan was unnecessary. If it wasn't, they needed to know that too. The ground engagement wasn't a desperate last defense. It was Phase 2, and she didn't know what it was designed to collect. She pulled the fleet's tactical log and found something that had been filed as a minor anomaly 3 days prior. A brief, localized communication burst from inside the fleet's own formation. Source unknown. Duration 2 seconds. Flagged by automated systems and dismissed as a calibration artifact. It wasn't a calibration artifact. She ran the directional analysis. The burst had originated from within the fleet, specifically from the area of space occupied by the fleet's logistics section. And it had been aimed not at Earth, but at a point 60 degrees off the planetary axis, in the direction of nothing. Except when she cross-referenced it against Earth's commercial satellite tracking data from 8 months ago. She found a decommissioned relay satellite that had apparently drifted to exactly that position. A decommissioned satellite that, she now noticed, had never actually stopped broadcasting. They had an asset inside the fleet asterisk. Not a spy, there were no humans aboard Dominion ships, but something the humans had positioned months ago, before the fleet arrived, that was passively collecting signals from inside the formation and relaying them outward. She didn't know how, she didn't know when they'd done it, she didn't know what data it had captured. She knew only one thing with certainty. Everything she had interpreted as human desperation over the past 3 weeks was actually infrastructure. The desperate improvisation of a doomed civilization was, in fact, the first 3 phases of something she couldn't fully see yet. Her hands were steady when she opened the report. She was not a person who showed fear easily, but when she looked at the spinning compass in the corner of her display, still pointing at something she couldn't name, she understood for the first time what it was measuring. Not magnetic north, not the planet below. Itself. She wrote in her report, "We are not acquiring Earth. Earth is acquiring data on us. I do not yet know what the data is for." She sent it. Then she added a second message, personally, to Fleet Commander Osek. "Sir, I need you to tell me something honestly. When did we stop being the ones who chose to come here?" The answer arrived not from Osek, but from the ground. Gret's teams had pushed 40 kilometers inland when they found the facility. It was underground, not deeply, but enough that orbital scans had registered it as geological formation, which it had been, once, before humans had spent 11 years converting it into something else. The facility was enormous. The scale of it was the first thing that stopped Gret, not the equipment inside, not the purpose he couldn't yet identify, but the sheer duration of intention it represented. 11 years of construction, 11 years of moving material, installing systems, training personnel, maintaining secrecy from a civilization that hadn't known it was being watched. Except they had known. Verath's report confirmed that. They had detected the survey drones in 19 days, which meant they had known for 11 months that the Dominion was watching, which meant the 11 years of construction had happened before that. Before the drones. Before any confirmed knowledge that the Dominion existed. "How did they know?" Seal asked, standing beside Gret in the facility's main chamber, looking up at a ceiling that stretched 50 meters overhead. Gret didn't answer. He was looking at the walls. They were covered in star maps, hundreds of them, and at the center of each star map, circled in what appeared to be hand-drawn notation, was a different solar system. Some Gret recognized, some he didn't, but he recognized enough of them to feel something cold move through him. 41 of the circled solar systems were former Verk acquisitions. The humans had been mapping the Dominion's expansion pattern for longer than anyone had known the Dominion was watching Earth. Not from signals the Dominion had sent. The Dominion maintained strict communication blackout in precontact systems. From the asterisk evidence left behind on the acquired worlds, trace signals, resource extraction signatures. The characteristic electromagnetic fingerprint of Verk industrial infrastructure, bleeding faintly across the radio spectrum for anyone patient enough to listen for decades. They had been listening for decades. "They didn't detect the drones in 19 days, Gret said slowly. "They detected us in 19 days. They already knew we were in the region. The drones just told them where to look." He turned around slowly in the vast chamber, taking in the star maps, the 41 circles, the years and years of patient, invisible preparation. "They've been expecting us." Seal said very quietly, "For how long?" On the wall behind her, half hidden in shadow, was a date. A human date. Gret's translation matrix rendered it approximately 43 years ago. Osek made a decision, then that Verath would later conclude was the moment the acquisition ended. Not because of what he decided, but because of what the decision revealed about everything the Dominion had gotten wrong. He ordered a demonstration strike. One city, a location his tactical teams had identified as having minimal population, a deliberate choice, an attempt at proportionality that he believed would convey the same message as a more devastating attack, while creating fewer long-term administrative complications in the occupied territory. The strike was precise. The city was as empty as the scan suggested. It was empty because the humans had evacuated it 2 weeks before the fleet arrived, knowing it would be targeted, knowing the Dominion would select isolated, low-population areas for demonstration purposes. They had known what kind of civilization the Dominion was. They had built their entire planning model around it. The city burned. The images broadcast across Earth's communication networks, and Earth's population saw their city burning, and Osek waited for the psychological inflection point. The moment fear compounded past the threshold of resistance, the moment the acquisition speech became inevitable. It didn't come. What came instead was a transmission. Not from the relay ship, not from the 7-ship formation, but from the surface of Earth itself, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, and it was not addressed to the fleet. It was addressed to the 41 other worlds the Dominion had acquired. It said, "We have a complete technical fingerprint of the Verk Dominion fleet, propulsion signatures, weapons system frequencies, communication handshake protocols, shield harmonic baselines. We are transmitting this data now. Every world that received this signal, you now have what you need to build the tools we built. We didn't stop them from taking us. We took from them what you'll need to stop them from keeping you." The transmission ran for 6 hours, uninterrupted, unencryptable because it was broadcast on frequencies the Dominion's jamming systems weren't designed to block. Frequencies the Dominion's own ships used internally, which the asset inside the fleet had spent 3 weeks mapping. Osek tried to stop the broadcast. He couldn't, because stopping it would have required taking the fleet's internal communication systems offline, and taking the fleet's internal communication systems offline would have required a full restart, and a full restart would have created a 6-minute window of vulnerability that, as every system in the fleet now recognized with the specific efficiency of thoroughly exploited engineering, was enough time to do quite a lot. Verath stood on the observation deck and listened to the 6-hour transmission and understood, finally, what the compass had been pointing at. Not something outside, something in the humans themselves, a direction that wasn't north or south or toward any star. A direction called *forward. The fleet withdrew. Not because Earth defeated it. The 43 warships were intact. The Dominion's military capacity was undiminished. Osek made the withdrawal decision on 2 grounds, both sound and both completely insufficient to address what had actually happened. The first ground was that the acquisition cost-benefit calculation no longer supported continued engagement. A Category 2 acquisition consuming Category 5 resources, ground forces stretched across a civilian combatant population with no clean separation, communication systems compromised, the tactical fingerprint of the entire fleet now in hostile hands. The second ground was one he never wrote in any official report. Verath knew it only because she was standing beside him when he said it to his adjutant, very quietly, in the 12 seconds between the order to withdraw and the execution of that order. He said, "We never made them hesitate." The fleet jumped to FTL. Behind them, Earth was still broadcasting. Verath filed her final report from the transit ship. It was longer than any analysis report she had written before, and it was not entirely about Earth. It was about the 41 other worlds. The Dominion had acquired 41 civilizations, had absorbed them, administered them, presumed their compliance was permanent because it had been achieved. But compliance achieved through fear in a species where fear and action could separate, where the feeling of being overwhelmed and the decision to continue could exist simultaneously, without contradiction, was not compliance at all. It was patience. For 41 worlds, it had been patience. They had received Earth's transmission. They had received the technical fingerprint. They had received also something more important, the knowledge that someone else had prepared for this, that the equation the Dominion had always presented as mathematics, resistance is irrational, submission is logical, the arithmetic of survival demands compliance, was an equation that could be refused. Not solved, not reversed. Refused. As though arithmetic itself could be looked at, understood completely, and then set aside in favor of something that wasn't arithmetic. Verath had no category for this. The Dominion's psychological and sociological databases had no category for this. It was the thing the compass had been pointing at all along, and she hadn't had the framework to see it. A species for whom the gap between asterisk cannot win and will not stop asterisk was not a contradiction to be resolved, but a permanent condition to be inhabited. She packed the compass in her personal effects when she left the observation ship. She was not sure why. She told herself it was evidence. She told herself it was relevant to future reports. She told herself she was a scientist and the object had analytical value. She was lying. She kept it because when she held it, the needle still moved, still searching, still pointing past the edge of what she could calculate towards something she couldn't see yet. And that feeling, she realized, was the closest she had ever come to understanding them. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their patience or their courage or their extraordinary and unsettling capacity to be afraid and useful at the same time. Just this, the needle turning, the inability to stop looking for the thing you haven't found yet, the refusal to call a direction asterisk unknown and sit still. She had studied 42 civilizations. She would study more. She would write reports and file analyses and calibrate threat assessments for the rest of her career. But she knew, holding the compass in the dark of FTL transit, while 41 worlds listened to a 6-hour broadcast from a planet that hadn't won and hadn't surrendered and was still, even now, still transmitting. She knew that the Dominion had never actually encountered a new species on Earth. It had encountered a mirror. And what it showed was not what the Dominion had expected to see. The needle turned. Somewhere behind them, 41 worlds were listening. Somewhere behind